What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and this is our first show of the year. That's right, we're back in 2021, and we have got so many things coming up. We've got 4 big retrospectives coming this year. We've got, I'm going to spoil it. I'm not going to spoil it. I've put it out there, but we've got 4 biggies coming out this year. I've got some other things coming up. I've got some interviews coming up that are fantastic. I'm really excited about. And I'm going to be doing some focuses on some specific characters. I am going to be celebrating an actor's 110th birthday this year. And I'm going to do something special for it. So I'm very excited. In fact, I'll tell you what. If you can come in and find and guess and tell me who that actor is, I'll probably give you a prize. So come on, find me on the Twitters or email me or find me in some way, contact me through one of my social medias. Which actor is 110 this year that I'm going to be doing a special on? Let me know what you think. Anyway, carrying on with this episode, we are going straight in with something fantastic this year. I recently read a book. It's a fantastically good book. It's a book that really is exactly what I've been looking for. Something I've mentioned on this show a couple of times. An idea that I have had rumbling around for quite some time. This idea of a horror shared universe. We've got the MCU, the DCEU, and they tried to do a shared horror universe with the Dark Universe. It wasn't very good. But this guy, Sean Hogan, author Sean Hogan, took this idea and ran with it. Not only once, but twice. We sort of touched on the second one. I'm yet to read it, but I'm very much looking forward to it. But his first book, England Screaming, is absolutely fantastic. And there's a full review of the book after the interview. But the book itself is a run-through, a walk-through, I should say, of English or British horror of the 20th century, entwining it all together. The Omen, Peeping Tom, so many others I'm not going to go into. I will go more into the review. Fantastic book. But first, before we get to that, I interviewed Sean Hogan. I got a chance to talk to him. Now, I should say that Sean's probably going to come back at some point, because not only did he write this wonderful book, he was also a producer on Future Shock, the story of 2000 AD, the documentary that looks at the history of one of my favourite comic anthologies, 2000 AD. So I'll be probably getting him on for that. But that's besides the point. Today we're here to talk about his book. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to me and Sean for our discussion of England Screaming. First things first, let's start with the smoke blowing. I really enjoyed this book. So England Screaming, I really enjoyed it. This book is the thing I've been waiting for a while. Like, ever since they had the comic books shared universes, and then the failed Dark Universe, I've kept saying I've been saying for ages, a shared horror universe is easy because there's so much for you, telling you how to do it. It takes some work, but you could do it. And then your book came along, and I was like, see, perfect. But where did you come up with the idea? What was the sort of the thing that triggered for you to create this narrative and stuff?
Well, I've always been sort of pretty open about this because I think it's good to acknowledge your sources. There's a book called Suspects, published in the 80s, written by the film critic David Thompson, which does a similar thing with film noir characters. And I always really loved that book, and I forget when I had the notion of doing a horror version of it, but eventually that sort of idea came to me. But it was just kind of an idea, because at that time, for like the last 15 years or so, I was mostly working as a screenwriter and a filmmaker. So the idea of writing a book was just kind of beyond me. I know a lot of writers. My partner's a writer, But I was always kind of like, yeah, no, that's proper writing. That's not what I do. And, and every time I thought about doing that book, it just seemed so huge and so insurmountable. I was like, where would I even start? That's crazy. And then randomly I got asked if I would be interested in writing a monograph for an imprint called Electric Dream House, which was just starting up to do books on film related, and mostly sort of genre related book films. And the editor, who I'd never met in my life, and I've still no idea why he asked me, but he got in touch and said, would you be interested in doing one of these? And, and they're monographs, so they only had to be sort of 20, 30,000 words. Yeah. And I was, flattered he'd asked me, and kind of just thought, well, why not? I'll, cross that off the bucket list. I can say I've written a book, even if I never do it again. So I ended up sort of agreeing, and I ended up doing a book on Deathline, which also features In England Screaming. Yeah. And I sort of chose it instinctively, really, without really knowing what I wanted to do. And in the end, it sort of took me a little while before I could get around to it. And I started thinking, I was like, I don't want to write your average monograph. I was like, I like reading them, but it's not particularly what I want to write. And so in the end, I ended up writing most of that book as the diary of the Donald Pleasance character from the film. Because I loved the character so much. I loved his voice. Yeah. That I thought, I'm going to write that character's diary. And then in the course of doing that, I sort of pulled in some other films as well. So I was kind of doing my mini version of what I'd always wanted to do. And I didn't tell the editor what I was doing. I kind of thought he might think I'm nuts. He might just bin it. But I was like, I don't care. This is what I want to do. If he doesn't like it and he doesn't want to publish it, that's fine. But I sent it to him and I was like, this is not quite what you were expecting, maybe. But he really liked it. And after having done that, I suddenly thought, maybe I could write that book, that bigger book. And I said to the editor, I was like, if I wrote this book, would you be interested in doing it? And he was like, yeah, absolutely. So kind of that was how I eventually came around to doing it. And then when I started doing it, it was a whole different thing. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this. It does seem to be as huge as I always thought it might be, but so it was a bit like running a marathon, but I got through it, and luckily it seems to have worked out okay.
Well, that's the thing. One of the things I find fascinating is, you said that how huge it is, because it is. I mean, this isn't like a couple of films interwoven. Like, this is a narrative over like just over half a century, encompassing like a ton of films. Yeah. Did you always have the narrative that sort of runs through it? Because there's little side. We'll talk about the side sort of tracks, but there's a main narrative that runs through it. Was that the starting point, or did that come later?
I can't remember what the starting point was. I did always kind of have that thread in mind, even if I didn't know all the places it was going to go to. I knew that I was going to end up sort of using Damien Thorne as that through line character, and I kind of knew roughly where it was going to end up. Yeah. Although I can't quite remember at what point John Mauler came into it as this kind of, opposing character to him. So I don't know, but yeah, I always kind of did have some idea of that thread. But honestly, the book kind of told me what it was when I started writing it. I didn't really entirely know what it was going to be. And while I was writing it, obviously, we were in the sort of, well, I say the early stages, the mid stages of the whole Brexit thing, and it just kind of crept into the book, although I never wanted to sort of use the B word, but that sort of feeling crept into the book of this is what's happening to the country. And just watching all those films, I just suddenly kind of got a sense of the larger picture of, just in terms of how those films are working on a social level and a class level. And it just kind of all came into the book without necessarily me really planning in advance that was what was going to happen. It just took on its own form, really.
So that's really cool, because when reading it, I think sort of, especially towards the end, like the final sort of third of the book, and I think there's a sort of theme I sort of picked up that I really enjoyed. And I was thinking about how you must have written this, and I had sort of this idea of like the serial killer board with with a red string all over the place, sort of like connecting. Right, so there's this film and this character goes off and goes over to here, and so that thing, because there's some really cool connections. And I love the fact
I did consider like making one of those boards, and then I just kind of thought, no, I'm gonna end up spending more time doing that board than I would write the book.
But I like the fact that there's different grades of references. Like, there's like, because each chapter is almost like a short story in many ways, But there's ones that are like, you'll have them bunched together. So there's like 3 that sort of like lean into each other quite heavily. And then you could be like 50 pages on and there's a reference back. And I was like skimming back going, oh yeah. So it had me sort of like shooting back and forth through the book, which I really enjoyed because it kept me thinking. But I did notice one of the things, the themes you say about that is about this class thing is the character of Dracula in particular. Obviously, it's the Hammer Dracula, and this idea of him going from being an aristocrat in the period Hammer stuff, and then being brought into to the Dracula 72 AD, but then becoming like a captain of industry and this new sort of like aristocrat of the modern. And I really like that sort of this idea of these characters sort of over time, it's almost maintaining their status, but in a more modern way and stuff. And
changing world, yeah. I mean, that's kind of obviously that's partly in the films. I was sort of just kind of using what was there, but it was it was interesting to write Dracula because you can take him over such a long period of time, and like the modern day Hammer films don't entirely deal with the implications of him being in a modern world so much. Like Satanic Rites does more so than Dracula AD 1972. So it was kind of fun to take that a bit further. But then you sort of put him into opposition with Damien Thorne, and then you obviously have kind of questions of ego and rivalry there, and so that kind of things. That was fun to do. You're just kind of clashing characters off each other and just sort of seeing what would happen, in a way that's the kind of fun stuff of it, where you just kind of like, what would happen if so and so met so and so,
Oh well, that's totally what it. I love that, and there's that in it. I mean, there's characters in this, and I will say there's characters that I know well because having watched the films and love some of the films, and then there are more obscure characters that.
Sure.
That sent me off onto movie watching tangents where I'm like, well, I can't watch this for 3 days and I can't read this for 3 days because I've got to go watch this film. Is it on Prime or Netflix or where can I get it from? So,
well, it's I mean, I wouldn't necessarily expect everyone to have seen everything, and in some respects, it's nice if you can kind of point people towards films that they may not have seen or may not know about. I think I do say in the opening of the book that it's not necessarily meant to be these are the best films. There are definitely some films in there I don't like. One or two which are terrible. But just kind of fit on a story level. So it's not meant to be a best of. I did sort of try and include stuff that I liked, that I thought was worthy of attention, and I tried to be representative as well. So just all the kind of different corners of what UK genre is. I was sort of wanting to try and include examples of that, which is why there's TV stuff in there, and even like the short public information film gets a chapter.
I was going to mention when there was because that was the question I was going to ask is like were you concerned that any of the characters were too obscure? And the more I thought about that, I was like, well, you have a public information in there about about water safety, and I'm not going to spoil anything much, but like it then leads into Donald Sutherland, and I'm
Don't look now.
Don't know now. And I was like, that's wonderful. Like, I was like, that's such a good idea. And then you obviously bring in one of my favourite things, and one of my sort of like formative horror memories from '92 is Ghost Watch.
Yes.
And Mr. Pipes is in there. So,
Yes.
these things get thrown in. And so, were you concerned at any point that you thought, this might be a bit too left field with any of the characters?
No, I kind of thought, there's going to be signposts in there that like everyone's going to know.
Yeah.
It's sort of like everyone knows the Omen movies, everyone knows Dolan now. So it's not going to. People are not going to pick up the book and kind of go, I don't know any of this. This is not speaking to me. It's like some of it they're going to know, some of it they may not, but hopefully by then they're in the kind of swing of the book anyway, and hopefully the pieces stand on their own 2 feet. It's sort of like you're not necessarily meant to have seen everything. There's probably a certain level at which, okay, you might get more out of it if you have seen everything, but the book should still work if you haven't seen everything. And if it puts people on to like some films, then great. But if I've done my job properly, you should be able to read those pieces, and even if you haven't seen the film, it should work on a story level, and hopefully some of the connections possible, to other films that you have seen. It's not meant to be like a fanboy wink wink. If you haven't seen all this stuff, you're not cool enough to read this book. It was never meant to be.
Oh no, yeah. And it doesn't. I haven't watched all the films in this, but but the narrative works.
I hadn't watched all until I wrote the book. There was like some stuff in there that I was like, all right, now I'm finally going to sit down and watch this.
Well, that was it. I mean, the thing is, I like the fact because it's this combination of obviously like classics. I mean, it starts with sort of like Night of the Demon, and then comes through to some more modern stuff. Including a film I actually really enjoyed, but it's a dark song.
Yeah.
But the occultist, it's tapping into like Aleister Crowley when he obviously tried to do the same thing in Loch Ness, and I was like. I really enjoyed that, but I was like, yeah, it's sending me off to find stuff. And I was like, that's what's really cool about this is, like you say, you don't have to be a full-on, horror aficionado to enjoy this. Like it works as a horror novel, as a horror sort of like as a history of this thing. And so you get to know the characters through the book anyway. But it works both ways, I think, because one of the things I found fascinating was if you know the films, you can get something from the book because you can do that comparison. But more so, if you've read the book and then go watch the films, you've got that. To me, I had that slight thing of like, no, well, this is actually, I can see this as part of this wider tapestry sort of thing.
Oh, great. Okay. Have you watched anything since you've read the book? Have you gone?
Well, A Dark Song. That was it. I went back and watched that.
Okay.
And I watched Borderlands and a few others. So yeah, I went to watch those, and I did. I sort of, it brings something weirdly to those films, or to the experience of watching those films. So so it worked both ways for me. So this is sort of like it's enriched my experience in both directions, which is great.
Oh, great.
So you can do that, and I recommend if people do, when they do, because I think everyone should do this, is when they do read this, is take it and do that with it.
Yeah, I mean, like a very old friend of mine read the book, and he was literally he would stop every time he got to a film he hadn't seen and watch the film before he carried on. So it took him a long time to read it, but I admired his dedication.
There were moments where I did. That's exactly what I did. There were times I was like, I've really got to watch this film, or Peeping Tom was a good one that's mentioned in the book. It's like one of those films. I was like, look, I've heard about this film so much; it's been on my watch list for ages. Right, I'm gonna go watch this now.
Right,
then I'll come back to it, and that was a good one. That was really cool. So yeah, there's so much in this, and I'll say it's added to my watch list. I'm going to enjoy it. But were there any films that you added or wanted to add that you went, this one I can't get this one to work, or it doesn't fit, and so you've had to take those out? Or
I don't think so. I can't remember anything offhand. I think I sort of got most of the ones I really wanted to get in there done. I mean, there's obviously a big sort of omission in the book, which is a lot of the kind of classic Hammer stuff, which is only because it's in period and never meant to be a sort of period book. There are moments of where it does go back into the past, but that's with stuff that does link up to the present day. But obviously, a lot of Hammer is period Gothic, and it doesn't do that. So there's a large chunk of sort of English genre cinema that it doesn't cover. But I mean, aside from that, I was sort of pretty happy with what I got in there. It was a bit hard on Peter Cushing because he only has a brief cameo in there because a lot of his most famous stuff is that kind of period Gothic. So I maybe should have tried a bit harder to get him a proper role. But that's my main regret, just in terms of not doing right by Peter Cushing. But I think in terms of actual films, I was sort of okay with what I had.
I was going to say, there's a definite leaning to Christopher Lee. Clearly worked incredibly hard for a period of time. Like, Christopher Lee gets a big shout out in this, and it's great that he does. But he also,
to the extent where he ends up having a scene with himself, which I kind of enjoyed doing.
Yeah, I was going to say that's what I mean. Like, it goes through. But I love the fact that he is, and I've got it here just because I wanted to remember it. Like, he appears throughout it, and he's almost like the character of he's a Fremont and Stratton Villiers.
Yeah.
So he acts almost. He's almost like he lives throughout this book, and it comes pretty much to modern day. And he's almost like, if you take the X-Files, he's almost like the cigarette smoking man in the background of this. Like he keeps, he appears and he sort of like, drifts in and out, and then he gets mentioned somewhere else, or like, he gets there's an allusion to him in it. And at the end of the book, you sort of highlight that. Oh well, actually, I've had lots of names, and throughout this book, you've actually known me as these two characters, and it's sort of like that final chapter. Or at least his final chapter is really cool. And he's like this. Yeah. What is he? Where does he come from? How does he sort of fit into this? I want to know more. So,
well, he really kind of wrote himself into the book. He wasn't necessarily planned, but so have you seen Deathline?
Not Deathline, no.
And have you seen Scream and Scream Again?
I've seen Scream and Scream Again, yes.
Okay, So when I wrote the book on Deathline, he definitely. I mean, so in the film Deathline, that character has one scene. Yeah, they got him in for a cameo role for one day, and it's a great scene. But they literally shoehorned it into the film because they were like, we can get Christopher Lee in for a day. So he has one scene with Donald Pleasance, but it's a great scene, and the character's very evocative. So when I wrote the book on Deathline, he kind of ended up sort of coming back into that because the book goes beyond the story of the film and takes the story further. So I enjoyed writing him in that. And then it occurred to me that he basically is the same character in Scream and Scream Again. So if you watch both films, they could be the same character. Yeah. So, different names, but in all other respects, they're the same person. So I was like, great, okay, they are the same person because that's what this book is. I can do this kind of stuff. So I was, and then it just kind of sprang from that. I'm like, well, if that's who he is, then of course he's going to have, his fingers are going to be getting into everything. And he kind of became representative of the establishment, of the kind of malign forces of, the shadowy establishment.
Yeah, and it works really well. I mean, like, he's a character because, like you say, he verges on immortality in some way. Like, we don't know, I suppose, but there's it's almost like he walks out of this book, and you sort of, or at least he gets chauffeured out of this book, and I'm almost like, where's he going? What else is he doing? What's he up to? Like, he's a fascinating character to sort of, like you said, to have him in the background because. I like the fact that this book does work on those layers, because he and sort of like Damien Thorne never really meet, but they've got these two narratives running through, and Damien obviously has like a Boris Johnson Trumpian kind of end, which I'm not going to spoil on it, but like he gets almost like a weirdly like evil redemption. Well,
again, that was something something else that was sort of fun to do, but also kind of has there's a sort of critical level to the book where you can go back and you can sort of look at things in films that don't work or are nonsensical or whatever. So it very much retcons Damien's story because Omen 3 just falls apart on so many levels.
Yeah.
It was fun to kind of go back and rethink that and sort of say, okay, this is actually what happened.
Yeah.
And you're trying to work within the framework of what's already there. You don't want to just kind of go, no, none of that happened. But you sort of try and interpret it in a slightly different way, because it was like, no one's satisfied with that film. I was like, no, there's... This doesn't make any sense. Let's go in a slightly different direction with this.
Well, it's one of those things, isn't it? Like you say, it's with a lot of the films like that, and I think Omen 3 is probably a really good example where you do watch it and you go, one more pass at this script, and they could have fixed all this.
Yeah.
And
it's very frustrating.
Yeah. And you've been given the opportunity to sort of fix that, and you do. It's great. Like I said, this covers so much, and like I say, I'll be doing a bit of a review of it within the podcast and stuff as well. So, but one of the questions is, or at least I saw, and I don't know if it was you that mentioned it on Facebook or something, is there a sequel or a follow-up in the works?
So, okay, there's two parts to this question. First part is there is already a semi-sequel in existence. Which is this book, which is called Three Mothers, One Father, which is a smaller book. It's like 25, 30.
Is this based on the Argento?
Yes, this is Euro horror.
Yeah.
So it's a more contained book about Euro horror, which is available from Black Shuck Books. And it's a nice, dinky little paperback that you can buy for about $5, I think, or you can buy the ebook 99p. That kind of came out around the same time as England Screaming, and they were, again, it was another publisher I know, and he asked me if I would do something for him, and I thought, I could write a little side project to the English book. So I did that. It has a couple of callbacks to England Screaming in it, so it's its own story, but there are a couple of connections to it. So that was kind of a sort of semi-sequel addendum to England Screaming. I am currently writing the sort of official follow-up, which is American horror, but will pick up the threads of England Screaming. So, and that is going to be pretty epic. I think I've written quite a lot of it, and I have a feeling I've not written even half of it. So that one I'm still in the middle of, and I'm still figuring out. But I think I'm having a lot of fun with it, and I think if you like England Screaming, then you should like this one.
Yeah, because I say, I love British horror is ace. I mean, you say it's everything from Hammer and Amicus and everything in between, sort of like, up to the modern day. Like it's got a real breadth and a real you can always tell British horror, I think,
Oh yeah, no, that was. I mean, when I first thought about doing this purely as a kind of fantasy idea in my head, it seemed natural to me to do American horror, because that was kind of my first love. That was sort of a lot of what I grew up watching. I sort of started on the Hammers because those were the first things I was allowed to see. But as soon as I was a little older, I kind of gravitated towards a lot of the kind of new wave American stuff. That was what really spoke to me, that sort of 70s new wave. And so that was kind of where a lot of my favorite stuff was. So when I first started thinking about the book, I was like, I would do American horror. Of course I would. And part of what initially sort of scared me about writing it was that American horror just seemed so vast.
Yeah. And
then I think it was I think it was Neil, the editor of the book, who I think he just assumed that I would do English horror. So when I sort of pitched the idea to him about doing the book, he just assumed it would be English, and I was like, I could. It seemed more manageable. I was like, I could do British horror because it's less vast. even though in the end it was still quite a big undertaking, it seemed more manageable. So now, having done that, now I'm like, yeah, I can do American horror now, and it's still as fast as I thought it was originally. So I'm still like, oh my god, what am I going to include? How am I going to get everything in there?
Yeah, I mean that goes back. So obviously, you get everything from Universal monsters through to,
Yeah, I mean, again, you have the same problem with a lot of the Universal stuff.
Being period.
In that it's period. A lot of it's set in some kind of weird fantasy Europe, so it doesn't really connect. So there's not going to be a huge amount of that kind of stuff in there. And a lot of it, I'm going to have to pick and choose. There's no way I can sort of get everything in anyway. So it's going to really everything's going to have to earn its keep in the American book. But I'm trying to get a lot in there.
That sounds great, though. I mean, like you say, there's so much like from the American, everything, like you say, from the slasher film through to, Corman horror and their gothic and their sort of, supernatural. So, yeah, that's...
Yeah, I mean, it's, in a very strong sense, these books have ended up being very much about kind of now and the world that we live in. And so I'm always kind of more interested in contemporary stuff, I suppose, just because it kind of works within the framework of what I'm doing. Is that I'm sort of using these films as a way to look at the world, I suppose. And so, I'm always going to be more focused on the more contemporary films. But there's always going to be some older stuff in there as well. Excellent.
I look forward to that when that comes out. As you say, I won't ask for a date because it sounds like you say you're wading through it at the moment.
I mean, I would hope to deliver it within the sort of first third of next year. But as to when it will come out, that's not really up to me. I mean, I would love if it could be out sort of late next year, but whether or not that's possible is down to the publisher. It's not up to me.
Yeah. No, but that sounds excellent. I'm very excited for that. And also, what's it called? Three Mothers?
One Father.
One Father. Yeah, so I'm taking note of that. So, so look out for that, listeners. So, if you do like it, sort of England Screaming, available from, I keep getting there, what's the publisher?
PS Publishing. PS Publishing are the main publisher, and Electric Dream House is the imprint, but it's available via the PS Publishing website or via Amazon.
Yeah, so it's out there, so check it out. And obviously Three Mothers, One Father, which I'm going to tootle off and have a look for as well, so I'm going to try and find a copy of that.
Marvellous.
But that's all my questions. It's been fascinating talking to you about it, and thank you for your time.
Oh. No, absolutely.
It's a great book, and I can't wait for the American one. Now that's going to be on the a note will be going on the sort of like the keep my eyes open for that one.
I will. Obviously, as soon as there's any information on it, I will pimp it. My limited presence on social media, but I will do the best I can to let people know it exists.
Well, I can. You are always more than welcome to be coming back on here, and we'll talk about it. And
sure, absolutely.
My horror knowledge will be sort of again. I'm happy to be going. Oh, I haven't seen that. Better go off and see that one.
My partner says exactly the same thing because she's a huge horror fan, but she's American, so she was not as familiar with a lot of these films because they were just not on her radar. Now she's like, "Oh, you're writing the American one, so I'm finally going to know what you're talking about." And I'm like, "Well, there might be some obscure stuff in there." But...
Yeah, like, maybe. I think that sounds good. But Sean, thank you very much. Really,
thank you very much for having me.
And we'll talk again soon. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. The interview with Sean Hogan. A wonderful bloke and a fantastic book. I should say, as I said before, actually, Sean Hogan will probably be coming back on the show at some point to talk about 2000 AD. And I really want to sort of look in on those lesser-known characters from the 80s and early 90s. But let's talk about England Screaming. Let's have a quick chat about the book itself. This book, published by Electric Dream House, as I said in the interview, was something I was really looking for. This is definitely something that it came about at the right time, really. I mean, I've always been talked about a horror shared universe. If you ever listened to one of our previous episodes, I had this idea about American Werewolf in London, and there's a character in that, Jack, who dies, and when he comes back as the undead, he says to the main Kessler boy, David Kessler, he says about everything they believed, or everything they'd ever heard about the supernatural, it was true. And I always felt that was like an in to a wider universe. But it was never obviously struck upon. It was never designed to be a franchise starter. That wasn't really what John Landis was looking to do. But this book basically does that. I mean, the character of Jack Goodman appears in this book, and sort of experiences exactly what he explains in the hospital. But more than that, this book takes a selection of the horror characters from the 20th century British horror scene and sort of weaves this narrative. Now, it's not to say that they all intertwine. It's not one huge story. It's like, as I say in the interview, it's more like a series of short stories or vignettes that sort of have a moment of sort of connectivity with other stories. There's some characters that sort of weave in and out of it more so than others. The main one being Damien, the Omen. It's sort of his story mainly, but you do get these other characters that are coming up, and films that are sort of mentioned or at least alluded to repeatedly, and that's one of the things that works, is because it feels like real life. Like this isn't. Whilst I love the MCU, it's all driven by a singular narrative overall. But this feels a bit more like the comics, of Marvel, where you'll have a certain amount of story, and this one might pop in just for a little bit, and that's sort of what this does. But some of the films that this sort of interweaves with are fantastic. I mean, you get some of the biggies, as I said. You get the Omen. Hellraiser's mentioned in here, American Werewolf in London. I'm trying to think now, sort of like Peeping Tom, another one, sort of British horror. But then a load of much more obscure horror. Well, not obscure, that's the wrong word, because it's not like it's hard to find. It's probably just lesser seen. But, it's just so well done that it doesn't matter if you have seen the film or not. If you've seen the film and the source material, it makes both of them better. If you haven't seen the source material, there is enough in here to give you enough information to really dig into it. So this drove me to go check out several films, and there's also several on here that were already on my watch list that I've now also gone and seen. So it actually does that. It drives you off to check things out. How does it stand up, though? I mean, the two things I'll say. How does it stand up as? Does it stand up as a narrative? Yes, it really does. I mean, the idea is that each chapter focuses on a character from a horror book, or from a horror story, horror film, and they're sort of woven together through their story and then others. So you obviously get Damien at different ages as he gets older. But one of my favourite ones in this is let's find it now. The film Don't Look Now with Donald Sutherland in. So I have to find it now. The Spirit again. So you got Anna Robinson and Laura Baxter. So you get this sort of three, at least two, but three I think, short sort of chaptery bits that stick together. And if you haven't seen it, I don't want to spoil it, but the film Don't Look Now starts with Donald Sutherland and his wife's character losing their daughter. So she drowns in a pond outside their house, and then they go off to try and sort of get over the grief in Italy and stuff, and it catches up with them a bit later on. Really good film, really suspenseful, really creepy at times. But more than that, this is bookended. It's preceded by a chapter by The Spirit of Dark and Lonely Water. And that chapter actually outlines the death of the little girl from the perspective of this Spirit of the Dark and Lonely Water. And reading it, I was like, oh my god, this is really interesting. The Spirit of the Dark and Lonely Water isn't from a film or a TV show. It's from a public information advert from the 70s about how dark and lonely water could be dangerous and you shouldn't go swimming in it. It was all about canals and ponds and how there's things in there that can pull you under and all this other stuff. So this spirit, in the advert, there was a dark figure that sort of told them not to go in. And this is in this chapter. And then it leads straight into, really well done, sort of, seamlessly into these other chapters about their grief and about the psychic abilities that are hinted at in the film. And I just found it imaginative and just plucking something from British culture from the sort of the 70s was so sort of spot on. I thought, so that's an example of how well this book works. But more than that, there's a character called Agent Fremont, blah, blah, and Stratton Villiers. Both characters played by Christopher Lee in different films. I think so. One's called Deadline, which is about subway cannibals, and another one called Scream and Scream Again. Agent Fremont, bloody hell. Agent Fremont is from Scream and Scream Again, and Stratton Villiers is from Deadline. But what they do is they combine them and make him into this sort of like shady sort of background character that sort of exists throughout the latter part of the book, and he keeps cropping up. And one of the great things about this book is that he just pops up in other chapters, like not as a main character or anything. He'll just appear and then disappear and stuff, like Cigarette Smoking Man. But it's clear he's not human or normal because towards the end of the book, it's actually explicitly stated, like, you look exactly the same as you did in the 70s, and now the book's taking place in the sort of the late 90s. And so it has this real sort of supernatural undercurrent. So the book itself, although it uses these films as source material and it mines them for all kinds of ideas and stuff, it doesn't stop there. It sort of elevates them to go, well, here's a character that was actually really obscure and only a part of that film, and now I'm going to give them their own narrative, and in doing so, elevate them as a character. And I just think that's a really cool idea. As I say, I've gone back and I've watched a lot of these films since having read it, and I've enjoyed them more with this thought in my head of this sort of like my head canon and how it connects with England screaming. The other thing is, just to say about the thing, so that's the idea, that's the premise and stuff. But Hogan's writing, Sean Hogan's actual structure and narrative and just his prose is really, really good. It's never bogged down. It never sort of wants to scream at you like, here's an Easter egg, here's more information, and check out this film and check out that film. He's not looking to sort of hit you in the face with it. While it does give you all those things, that's not the premise of the book. It's just sort of the structure of the book. So it carries through as a really well told series of short stories. And the thing is, well, the tone in some of these stories, whilst always horror, veers from in their secondary genre. They never fully accept sort of like comedy, but you do get everything from full on like supernatural and ghosts and witchcraft to just plain psychological horror, and some dark humour in there as well. So it does cover the gamut of stuff. Like, it's not just trying to sort of hit a single tone over and over again. You get it all, and that's what you get from just reading this. Not only is the book good, but you get this sort of glimpse of how varied and interesting British horror was, or is, I should say. So yeah, it's a really worthwhile reading book. I mean, it's not hugely long. It's not a massive tome. It's really accessible, and it's just checking this out. It's about 200 and just shy of 300 pages, all in all. And I think you can read it really relatively quickly, and as you build up your knowledge of these things, I'm sure it will drive people to go and check out the source material. So, I really enjoyed it, and I'm really glad I got to speak to Sean Hogan about it. And I'm really glad it's actually the first episode we've done this year. It's a bit of a, it's just a bit of a light, nice way to start the year with a nice interview and something around some horror as we're still in the darker months. Check it out. It's available on Amazon and obviously through Electric Dream House directly, and a couple of other sites that do specialist books. But it's really, really good. More than that, I haven't read it yet. is his follow-up. He did like a short follow-up, and I haven't really, I've got it, which he mentions in the interview. Let me get it. So I got it. There you go, look at this. Live streaming, as it were. Okay, 3 Mothers, One Father, and this does the similar thing with European horror, as he said. So I've got that, and this is done by the Black Shuck Shadows series. Cost me about £6, this one. It's not, it's a nice little paperback. And again, this is about, it's just shy of 200 pages. It was a much shorter book, smaller book, but this covers sort of like European horror. And now he's working on the American book as well, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what he pulls together with that. So much there. Hoping it sort of ends with something like the Blair Witch or something like that. That'd be quite cool. But yeah, England Screaming, wonderful book, absolutely fantastic book. The cover, I should mention the cover actually as well. The cover is absolutely excellent. It's the artist. I'm going to just find him because I need to shout his name out. The artist, I believe, is the same guy who has done a number of covers for like Arrow and Second Sight, and a couple of other sort of smaller, can't find his name, those smaller specialist publishers. There you go. Yeah, Graham Humphreys. There you go. Cover art by Graham Humphreys, and it's really good. I mean, you know, it's just detailed and moody, and it's brilliant. So yeah, there you go. That's my rough review of England Screaming. Highly recommend it if you like your horror and you like something a bit different. I definitely recommend checking it out. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, there we are. We've had our first episode of 2021, and we've got a couple of goodies coming up. In 2 weeks' time, with our next episode, I am going to be kicking off our first retrospective of the year. And we're not going out with a small thing. We're not going to go with some obscure horror franchise or something out. We're going to be doing the Caped Crusader. We're going to be doing Batman himself. And I actually caught up with Mike Burton of Genuine Chit Chat and Star Wars Comics in Canon, and his good lady girlfriend Megan, to talk about Batman films. So we did all of the Batman-centric films that had received a theatrical release. So that is Batman 66, Batman 89, Batman Returns, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, Batman Mask of the Phantasm, Batman Begins, Dark Knight, and Dark Knight Rises. Now, that's not all in one episode. That's a 3-part retrospective that we are doing at the start of this year. And the first episode coming in 2 weeks is Batman 66, Batman 89, and Batman Returns. So there's something to look forward to. They're going to be fantastic. And some of the opinions in there are so cool. More so because, you know, I'm a Batman fan. I've lived with these films all my life. Mike has seen these bits and pieces, you know, for the most part. Megan is a novice. She's a newbie coming into this. And so being introduced into sort of the Batman movies, she comes back with some interesting insights. So it's a really good retrospective. Can't wait for you guys to hear that one. And there's some more stuff coming down the line. I'm not going to spoil any more, but that's what's coming next. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got anything you want to say about England Screaming, or you want to know more information, or you want to talk about the next retrospective, or anything else we're doing on the show, please get in contact with me. You can email me at 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. You can contact me through the website. That's 20thcenturygeek.com. And there's a contact page on there, as well as all the podcast episodes, old blogs, reviews, news, all kinds of things on there. So check that out. Or also find us on Twitter, Facebook, all the social medias, always on as 20th Century Geek. So if you want to find us on Twitter, that's at 20th Century Geek. Instagram, 20th Century Geek, so on and so forth. You'll be able to find us. We're quite conspicuous. We've also got a Patreon page where every month we do a podcast called 30-Minute Thoughts, where I give my thoughts on a specific topic, just random thoughts, having thought about it. Could be anything from bodybuilding or horror, and Christmas was a good one, to a specific comic. I did Sandman issue 1, so please go check that out. That's a new monthly podcast. I also do a quarterly interview where I interview a creator in Creator's Corner and talk about a specific project that they have been working on. We recently spoke with Kieran Gillen about Want and Future, which was really good fun. So please go check that out. That's Patreon /20th Century Geek. Finally, if you don't want to contribute to the Patreon, and I fully understand why, but you still want to support the show, go onto your podcast catcher and leave a review. I usually say leave a 5-star review, but leave whatever you review you feel is authentic to you. So please, whatever you want to leave, all reviews and feedback are welcome. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening, and we shall see you on the next podcast.